It's only turn 5, and already things are starting to look bleak. Someone at the table has started moving far ahead of everyone else, to the point where it's unfeasible to race them to the finish. On the wings of a particularly powerful card, they're flying off into the sunset. It's decided that your friend needs their wings clipped, but looking at your hand, you realize that's not something you can do. It's not your responsibility, you've taken the proper advice of playing a decent quantity of removal cards to prepare for these situations. Heck, 2 of them are in your hand right now. The problem is that these cards miss the mark. They simply do not stop the threat. It's not an issue of quantity, but instead of quality. Due to the random nature of Magic, sometimes this will just happen. You'll end up with the wrong cards in your hand at the wrong time. However, if you find yourself in this situation often, I may have some advice that can help you out. To determine what removal is worth playing, I think it's important to quickly establish what removal is and why we play it. The definition of removal changes depending on who you ask. Of course, Doomblade is removal, it says destroy right there on the card, but this case gets trickier the more questions we ask. Is a bounce spell removal? Is land destruction? What about counterspells? You can debate the fine line all day, but for my money, it's better to lean towards inclusivity here. So, for argument's sake, I'm going to say that removal is any effect that neutralizes your opponent's permanents, spells, or effects. This casts a pretty wide net and includes all of the aforementioned types without making the definition so wide that it becomes useless. Doomblades, Chaos Warps, and Paths to Exile are obvious and classic examples of removal, but we also get to include the snaps, counterspells, and bushwhacks of the game this way. Now that we have an idea of what it is, let's talk about why we play it. Let's say we're ahead in a game. Our opponent has a large threat, but ours is larger. Because we're ahead, we're under very little pressure to remove their threat. If the game continues without significant changes, and the 2 of us just go back and forth, we are likely to win just coasting off of the current difference in board state. Now, let's flip the script. Our opponent is the one with a massive scary threat on board, and we're the one who's behind. In this situation, removal is incredibly relevant. Without a bigger threat of our own to close the gap, our options are either to get rid of their star player or lose. From this angle, it becomes clear that removal is most valuable when we are behind. It functions best at dragging someone back towards parity, a roughly equivalent board state with the rest of the table. This matters in every format, obviously. There are many times in Magic where you will not be ahead, and being able to sweep someone's legs out from under them can get you back into the race. But, in Commander specifically, the importance placed on removal is compounded due to one huge difference: player count. In a game with 2 players, you should be behind approximately 50% of the time. This doesn't account for how long you're in parity together, sure, but it means removal has a time and a place. In Commander, the table is now expanded to a total of 4 players, which means, all else being equal, you should find yourself falling behind 75% of the time. This is a massive difference, and it leads to a headspace of often wishing you had ways to set people back. But you can't just run a pile of 100 removal spells and expect to win. Instead of exposing yourself to consistency issues by flooding your deck with these cards, I find it more helpful to focus on making the removal you do play go further. In order to do this, we want it to be online more often and have a higher impact on the game. Removal is online when you both A, have the resources to use it, and B, have a relevant target to use it on. Removal is great in theory, but if you can't use it, you may as well not have it. But you don't actually have to play your removal in order for it to serve its purpose. Sometimes it's much better to sit back and watch the fireworks as someone else takes care of the problem for you. What's important is that, when all else fails, you can fire off your removal without issue. It's far better to have and not need than it is to need and not have. Having a higher impact is harder to pin down. You can think of it as how far back a card will pull an opponent or push us forwards. This can take the form of hitting one player especially hard, taking care of multiple threats at once, or involve giving you a lot of benefits as a side effect. With these 2 goals in mind, there are a number of traits we can start looking at to get more bang for our buck. The first thing that comes to mind is increasing efficiency. Let's say you've got 2 different spells. One destroys a creature for 4 mana, while the other destroys a creature for 2. Obviously, requiring fewer resources makes a card better, but this has a few ripple effects on removal. First of all, it determines how much you can advance your board. removal plays a kind of tug-of-war game with your threats over your resources. If you've got a total of 7 mana available on a turn, then the 4 mana removal spell will leave you with only 3 mana left to develop your board, whereas the 2 mana spell will leave you with 5. If removal's ultimate goal is to help you get ahead of the leader, then being able to remove something and continue to put your own threats out on the same turn means you're in a better position than if you had to pick and choose. If you decide to develop your board while holding expensive removal, you can end up putting your own spell offline until your next untap. Let's say instead that you have a free removal spell, one that costs 0 mana to play. You could hold this open all day if you'd like, and it would put no strain on your developmental resources. Cards like Snuff Out, Fierce Guardianship, and Force of Vigor let you get away with having your cake and eating it too. Although they still invoke other costs, they each let you get greedy with your mana and still interact when you need to. Something else about mana cost is that it determines the disparity in this resource exchange. Let's say you cast a 2 mana kill spell targeting someone's 8 mana beater. You have just traded a cheap card for an expensive one, and profited 6 mana in the process. This is how you're leveling the playing field, and the more mana your spell costs, the less profit you end up making. Now this math gets a little weird in multiplayer because your other 2 opponents didn't pay any mana for this interaction, but still, efficiency does matter. The next thing to consider when choosing removal is its flexibility, what card types it can and can't affect. It may look great on your tapped out curve to have all 1 mana kill spells, but the moment you start drawing all of your answers, only to find out they do nothing in the face of another player's artifact win condition, you're gonna have second thoughts. This is another area where Commander diverges from other formats. In Standard and Modern, it's more likely you'll find deck lists that have very efficient but rigid removal. They boast a variety of silver bullets. Well, this is due to another format difference, the sideboard. In those formats, after playing a game against someone, you have the opportunity to substitute in some cards from a 15-card selection that exists outside the main deck. This lets players fill their sideboards with a variety of answers and pick and choose the exact cards they need for a specific matchup. This is a luxury we do not have in Commander. Our removal has to be applicable against a number of different strategies. If it isn't, then back to offline it goes. Cards like Generous Gift, Beast Within, and Chaos Warp show this off well. All 3 can hit every type of permanent, which means that we'll probably find a use for them regardless of the decks we're playing against. This doesn't have to be all or nothing though. Resculpt can take care of both creatures and artifacts. Bovine Intervention does a great impression of this card in white, and Abrade can do it for small creatures in red. It also has a twin card in Suplex if you're especially interested in this effect. When you're looking for flexible enchantment killers, Get Lost is a good place to start. Green is a color known for hitting artifacts and enchantments, but Archdruid's Charm goes the extra mile to add exile and the possibility to fight creatures every now and then. Black has been getting more support here, with Feed the Swarm and Withering Torment both attacking 2 card types apiece. Another dial we can turn here is something I call Robustness. This is the ability of removal to get around different protective abilities that would prevent some removal from functioning. The most prevalent of these protections is Indestructible. Over time, the game has seen an increase in the number of powerful threats with this keyword. Codus the Fang Keeper, a variety of gods, the infamous One Ring, and if something doesn't have it, no problem. Slap down a Mithril Coat and shield them at instant speed. As this keyword spreads, players need ways around it. Exile is the simplest example. Since Indestructible specifically prevents destroy clauses from working, the put into the exile zone effect of exile cards manages to thread the needle. Swords to Plowshares, Haywire Might, and Reality Shift all fulfill this requirement while still being efficient in the mana department. Another way around this is to afflict the target with -X effects. Although an indestructible creature cannot die from damage that would reduce it to 0 or less toughness, its toughness can still be decreased. Anything that instructs you to give out -1/-1 or similar counters will kill an indestructible creature so long as they're put to 0 toughness. Cards like Dismember, Profane Command, and Toxic Deluge help you get an edge against gods that have hit Devotion and the Coduses of the world. But enough about Indestructible. Ward is a new hotshot contender for the Keep My Guy Alive Even Though Everybody Hates Him cup. It asks you to pay an additional cost as you target the permanent with Ward. Otherwise, your spell or effect is countered. Now, you could always just, pay the cost or whatever, but instead, let's say you didn't want to sacrifice 3 non-land permanents, what the fuck? There's actually a clever workaround. Cards that say cannot be countered will see the ward, but politely ignore it. Abrupt Decay, Void Rend, and Wreak Havoc all have this very helpful line of text so that you can tell your friends you'd rather not refinance your house just to kill Tivit. Uh-oh, it sounds like Ward's big brother heard us having fun and it didn't like that one bit. Hexproof is a tricky one. Being untargetable to spells and effects really puts a damper on the old Doomblade. You can, of course, just play board wipes, but I feel bad for cheating earlier and mentioning Toxic Deluge, so let's take a different route. Sacrifice beats Hexproof. Forcing an opponent to choose and lose their creature completely circumvents targeting, but we can do better than just letting them pick whichever of their pieces they'd most like to keep. Flare of Malice, Crackling Doom, Soul Shatter, and a whole host of New Age Edict effects all ensure that the permanent getting sacrificed will be of some value. They also say each opponent, which gives you a lot of extra impact. Another major influence in removal's viability is its speed, the state of being instant or sorcery. The discrepancy between these two in power is a lot higher than you might think. Remember when we talked about wanting to keep your removal online more often than not? Well, the speed at which you can play removal is huge for that. Think about a game of Commander. With 4 players, you have 4 total turns to hold up removal for. If your removal is instant speed, you have the ability to hold onto it as the turns progress and use it in response to most actions. With sorcery speed removal, it can only be used on your turn. This means that instant speed removal has over 4 times as much time online as sorcery speed removal does. I say over 4 times because even during the one turn you can cast sorcery speed removal, there are times when you can't. Of the phases that make up your turn, only on your first and second main phases can you spring this sort of removal. Any moments during combat, your beginning phase, and end step are completely off limits here, not to mention wanting to cast removal in response to another player's actions. Instant speed removal also gives you the benefit of information. On your turn, you can see the board states as they currently are. This is fine, and you can still make informed decisions about what to get rid of. But with instant speed removal, you can see how these board states will develop before pulling the trigger. Let's say one of your opponents has an Elemental Bond. Pretty decent card, but not necessarily a threat that needs taken care of on its own. On their turn, they decide to cast Azuri's Predation. This will not only swing the board presence in their favor, but will also draw them a million cards off the Elemental Bond with the tokens it creates. This is horrible for you, but with instant speed removal, you can see the problem coming and assess Elemental Bond's threat level with the benefit of that information, taking it out before they can get their triggers. Lastly, there are a lot of little additional benefits that cards will give out to increase their impact. These are all over the place and take a variety of forms, so I'm just going to go through some of the more interesting ones. Dismantling Blow lets you invest any mana you have laying around into card draw. Hull Breach is, if you can find good targets for it, a quite frankly absurd rate to take care of 2 problems at the same time. Witness Protection comes from a family of cards that get rid of problematic abilities, and they are especially potent against commanders that you know will just get recast if you destroy them. Kenrith's Transformation does this while drawing you a card. Bushwhack and any card with the word Charm in the name let you pick from a list of abilities, and can play multiple roles if removal isn't what you need. If what you want that other role to be is a land, Witch Enchanter, and like 20 other cards, can do that for you. These also let you increase the number of removal cards you play without decreasing your deck's consistency. There are a million more examples of this, but we'll be here all day at this rate, so moving on. What I've said in some of these sections may sound contradictory. Blardist, you talked about how important it is to have cheap removal right before clowning on cheap removal for not hitting enough card types. What gives? Well, this is because nothing in life is free. As much as we dunk on Wizards of the Coast for dropping the ball every now and then, usually, they do a pretty decent job balancing the game. Evaluating removal is like one of those triangle graphs, with the benefits on each of the points. The closer you get towards some desirable traits, the further away you have to get from others. Cheap, instant speed removal likely won't hit many card types, while flexible instant speed removal won't be as mana efficient. In this case, we actually need a shape with more dimensions, because we also have robustness and additional benefits to contend with, but you get the idea. There's a give and take here, so having all of the above really isn't an option. I mean, after all, something that had all of these benefits would go into every single deck in its color, regardless of strategy. That would be wildly unbalanced, and probably unhealthy for the game, wouldn't it? The game you need to play is choosing removal that gets as much out of this give and take as possible. So, with that out of the way, let's put it all together and talk about some cards that I think of as premium removal. Anguished Unmaking may not be the newest or shiniest toy in the box, but I'd still play it in every deck that has its colors. At 3 mana, it's a little pricey, but I'd argue it's well worth it. Exile spells will often be fairly strict in what you can target. Hitting every non-land permanent at instant speed makes this the ultimate answer to anything that doesn't have hexproof. Tear Asunder is a close relative to Anguished Unmaking, exiling a card at instant speed. It comes with a little bit of a twist though. If you're on the market to get an artifact or enchantment off the board, it only costs 2 mana, but if the situation demands more flexibility, then Tear Asunder can charge you more mana to get there. Wonderful card. Blue has pretty great 1-for-1 creature removal options, but if you want something a bit higher impact than your average Frogify or Pongify, then I think I have something that will interest you. Amphibian Downpour. This thing is a total menace. Where do I start? It's 3 mana, but even though it's an aura, being packaged with flash means you can cast it at instant speed. It'll strip the abilities from a problematic creature, then turn it into a 1/1. The most absurd part of this card, though, is one word: Storm. Storm means that when you cast this, you make a copy of it for each other spell cast this turn. So, you can wait for someone to make their plays, and then as they're going to their end step, drop the Downpour. Oftentimes, this will get rid of every significant creature in one swoop, of course leaving yours untouched. It also gets around counterspells, since Storm is a cast trigger. If you suspect one of your opponents is holding up a counter, you can opt to target their creature with more than one copy to hedge against it. Riveteer's Charm is a great modal piece of removal. Its first mode lets you force someone to sacrifice their most expensive creature. Its last mode can get rid of graveyards, which we haven't talked about yet here, but it's important. Please God, play Graveyard Hate. And for all the times when you don't need removal, it lets you essentially draw 3 cards. It's also an instant, which means you can hold it up for removal on other people's turns, and if nothing causes too big of a stir, instead opt to fire off the card draw mode to make use of the 3 mana you're setting aside. But these have all been fairly mana intensive so far. Here's a cheap one. Static Prison. Costs 1 white. Exiles a non-land permanent under it for 3 turns. First of all, that rate is pretty fantastic. I know it's sorcery speed, but this thing can lock down some of the most problematic cards in the game for 1 mana. 3 turns is also just an eternity in this game. There are many board states where the thing you put into prison just won't be coming back, ever. The game will end, or the owner will be gone by the time they've served their sentence. You'll also be surprised just how often players are willing to put their commander back in the command zone rather than lose access to them for 3 turns. In these scenarios, it's kind of a more flexible Swords to Plowshares. It obviously gets better in an energy deck where you can pay the toll, but even on its own, I think Static Prison puts in work. This section will likely be dated pretty quickly, but giving you specific recommendations isn't the point here. I want this guide to be a reference for what to value in removal. These examples are just that, examples. They function to show off what these lessons look like in practice. As new sets come out, it'll be your responsibility to take what we talked about here and decide what does and doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Hopefully, this guide provided you the necessary tools to evaluate removal in Commander. What's popular can be a good starting point, but to determine cards that will have your back in a pinch, I think it's more helpful to get a holistic view of what to look for. This isn't comprehensive though, and if you have some advice to add to the discussion, or examples of removal you think overperform, absolutely, leave them down in the comments. I read every single one of them, and will be happy to talk about how else to flesh out these points. If you enjoyed the video, liking it and sharing it around will help increase its reach and have others find it. If you're a fan of my whiteboard antics, then consider subscribing. If YouTube does its job, then you'll be notified about it when I upload. In the event that you don't trust YouTube, I have a Discord where we send out more direct notifications and get people together for games of Commander and other formats. Lastly, I have a Blue Sky, where I complain about the state of the game and, well, yeah, mostly that. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.